All right, today we're going to tear into a real classic, John Kenneth Galbraith's A Short History of Financial Euphoria. Now, it's a small book, but wow, does it pack a punch. It's all about that big nagging question. Why do financial markets seem to be stuck on a loop, going through these massive booms and then absolutely devastating busts, time and time again?
And right from the get-go, Galbraith does not pull any punches. His whole argument, really, is that history is a pretty harsh teacher. And the main lesson it keeps trying to teach us is that unchecked optimism and just pure euphoria, well, they come with a very, very steep price tag.
So here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll get into why this cycle just seems to be endless. Then, we'll dissect the anatomy of a bubble piece by piece. We'll explore the crazy psychology that makes it all happen, look at 3 absolutely wild historical examples, and then finally, we'll talk about what Galbraith says is the only known antidote.
Okay, so this is the absolute core of Galbraith's argument. Financial bubbles are not mistakes. They're not glitches in the matrix. He says they are a permanent, baked-in feature of how markets work, all because they're driven by the one thing that never, ever changes: us, human nature. And what's so fascinating and kind of scary is that this drama plays out almost the exact same way every time. Galbraith lays it out like a predictable 4-act play. And it all starts with just a handful of very smart, very quick investors.
So Act 1. A few really sharp investors spot something new, maybe a new technology, a new market, and they get in super early. Then comes Act 2. The public sees these guys making an absolute fortune, and that fear of missing out, FOMO, it kicks in hard. Everyone wants a piece of the action. This mass euphoria is like pouring gasoline on the fire. But then, in Act 3, the smart money, they see the writing on the wall. They know it's gotten insane, so they quietly head for the exits. And that sets up the tragic final act, the crash. There's no one left to buy, panic hits, and all the people who jumped in late are just left completely wiped out.
So really, you've got 2 main groups in every single one of these stories. You've got the savvy few, the ones who start the whole thing and, most importantly, know when it's time to leave the party. And then you've got the euphoric majority, who show up late, totally convinced that this time it's different, and, well, they're the ones who end up footing the bill.
But that raises the big question, right? If the pattern is so predictable, why in the world do people fall for it every single time? And this is where it gets really interesting, because now we have to talk about the psychology, the real engine of this whole boom and bust machine.
Galbraith points to one core problem, and he calls it the brevity of financial memory. It's a fantastic phrase. It basically means that, as a whole, we are shockingly good at forgetting the pain of the last disaster. The warnings just kind of fade away, the old stories get boring, and pretty soon, the market is perfectly set up for the next round of insanity.
Galbraith pointed out that this cycle of forgetting used to take about 20 years, a full generation. But now, it's compressed to about a decade. And why is that? Well, 10 years is just enough time for a whole new wave of investors to come into the market. People who've never lived through a big crash. All they've seen is prices going up, up, up.
And you've got to add this other dangerous little psychological quirk on top of the amnesia, the illusion of insight. It's what happens when everyone is making easy money. They don't think, wow, the market is hot. They think, wow, I am a genius. And that delusion makes them feel invincible. So they start taking bigger, crazier risks. Because, hey, how can a genius possibly lose?
Okay, I know this might all sound a bit abstract, but history is just littered with proof that this script gets followed almost perfectly. So let's look at 3 of the most famous examples, and we'll start with the one and only tulip mania.
So our first stop is way back in 17th century Holland. This is home to probably the first and definitely the most famous speculative bubble ever, the tulip mania. See, this beautiful exotic flower had just shown up in Europe, and before long, people went completely, utterly bonkers for it.
The obsession got so out of control that people were literally selling their homes, their land, all of their life savings just to speculate on flower bulbs. At the very peak of this madness, a single rare tulip bulb was trading for the equivalent of $30,000 today for a flower. And when the crash finally came, and it always does, it threw the entire Dutch economy into a deep depression.
Okay, let's jump forward about 100 years to Britain in 1720 and talk about the South Sea Bubble. This whole thing was built on a story. A company called the South Sea Company got these exclusive trading rights with South America, and the public was fed these incredible tales of mountains of gold and silver just waiting to be dug up.
And just look at this timeline. The hype worked. The company's stock price just exploded.
It went from 100 pounds in January to over 1,000 by the end of summer. But there was a tiny problem. Those trading rights, they were mostly fake. When the truth finally got out, the stock collapsed even faster than it rose, and it just annihilated fortunes all across the country.
And if you're thinking, well, only idiots get caught up in this stuff, think again. One of the most famous people to lose a fortune in the South Sea bubble was Sir Isaac Newton. Yes, that Isaac Newton. The guy who basically invented modern physics lost what would be over $1 million today. It just goes to show you the unbelievable power of mass hysteria to cloud the judgment of even the most brilliant people on the planet.
So, if financial euphoria is just bound to happen, and even certified geniuses can fall for it, is there any hope? Are we all just doomed? Well, Galbraith says there is, but it's not some magic formula. It's a mindset. He calls it the only known antidote.
See, the defense Galbraith talks about isn't some complicated investment strategy. It's all intellectual. It's about building a mental defense system. First, you have to know your history. You have to be deeply skeptical when people start talking about some new financial innovation that can't possibly fail. You have to distrust the idea of easy money. And maybe the hardest one of all, you have to recognize the pull of the crowd and consciously resist it.
This quote that Galbraith uses from Friedrich Schiller just nails it, doesn't it? An individual person can be smart, sensible, rational, but the second they join a crowd, that logic can just fly out the window. The pressure to go along, that fear of being the only one left behind, it can turn anyone into, as Schiller so bluntly puts it, a blockhead.
And that, of course, brings us right here to today. The names change, tulips become railroad stocks become .coms become something else entirely, but the underlying human psychology of the crowd, that never changes. So the real takeaway from Galbraith, the question to ask yourself is, when you look at the markets right now, with all the news stories and soaring assets, can you spot the signs? Can you hear the echoes of history?